Story 1. Read the entire message instead of replying to the first line. Story 2. Apologizing and changing one's opinion after being proven wrong. Story 3. Critical thinking. I know a lot of people, but many of them easily fall for tricks or misinformation. They are kind but very gullible. I do not deliberately want to be around them. It becomes very annoying when I have to report an issue to them. They tend to believe the first thing they see online, which is often an artificial intelligence summary that is only partially correct. Story 4. Learn to research things yourself. Social media is filled with questions that could be answered with a 20-second Google search or a 5-minute YouTube video. Story 5. Patience. It is unbelievable how some people behave in traffic or in long lines. Story 6. Why is it so hard for people to use their turn signal? Story 7. Active listening. Many people I talk to, because my job has me on the phones all day, seem incapable of picking out relevant information during a conversation or catching very blunt prompts when I need a specific piece of information to help them. Story 8. Conflict resolution. Most adults argue like toddlers with wireless internet. Story 9. Reading a map is difficult for many people. In my experience, they cannot mentally place themselves in a top-down view and navigate from point A to point B, even when the map covers only a 3-block area. Story 10. Anything related to Microsoft Office. Nothing makes me more enraged than when I hear people say, "Oh, don't bother putting anything related to Microsoft Office on your resume. Everyone knows it." That's not true. I have had to show a supervisor at work how to fill down formulas in Microsoft Excel. I have had to show another adult that she could not highlight any text in a Microsoft Word document because it was a scanned image. And while this is not Office directly and plenty of people complain about it, there was a stretch in my current job where I was showing my supervisor how to use Microsoft Teams at every meeting. And for the older crowd, I constantly hear the excuse, "Well, I didn't grow up with this stuff." My response is learn. Write it down when I show you, and don't get upset because I fix it so quickly that you cannot pay attention. Story 11. Simple math seems to be a skill only a minority of adults can do. Even if they use a calculator, they cannot make sense of the results. There was even a book written about this titled Innumeracy. Story 12. How to have an argument. Even more importantly, when to concede an argument. Story 13. Reading comprehension. I work in a university setting and am supposedly working with the best of the best in their field. A lot of them are complete morons who need everything spelled out in concise bullet points because they cannot read an email unless it is broken down into short action items. Yet I am supposed to believe that these people are critical to teaching college students how to think and function. It is honestly concerning. Story 14. I have been in therapy for a few months. One thing I have learned is that many adults lack important skills needed to navigate life and relationships, such as emotional regulation, effective communication, and accepting constructive criticism. I think the average person is insecure. Story 15. I am beginning to suspect most of them cannot identify common birds and trees. Story 16. Checking tire pressure and adding air. The lines I see at Discount Tire when the weather cools are crazy. Takes less than 5 minutes to do it yourself at home. Story 17. The ability to estimate how long any given task will take. I swear to God, so many people do the same thing repeatedly yet act completely surprised when it takes as long as it always does. I had a boss who would say he had to quickly run to the mall and be back in 15 minutes. The drive took 15 minutes each way, plus time at the mall. He made that trip every few days and was surprised that it took an hour each time. Story 18. Being able to separate their sense of self from something they have projected it onto. Story 19. I wait for others to finish before speaking. It has reached the point where I no longer bother to speak and let everyone else drone on. Story 20. Basic housework includes disinfecting the sink after doing the dishes, cleaning the toilet and shower weekly, washing the sheets, cleaning baseboards, emptying the food trap in the dishwasher, cleaning the washing machine, and similar tasks. Story 21. Social, spatial, and situational awareness. Most people seem to have zero clue how their actions directly affect those around them. Story 22. Many people cannot empathize with others and often focus on their own immediate needs and desires. Story 23. Learning to leave people alone when they clearly do not want your company right now. Story 24. Listen to understand, not to respond. This bothers me when I talk to people. Honestly, I consider myself a pretty good listener and I try to be. In today's culture, people often listen to respond rather than to understand. I believe that if we all slowed down and listened more intently and actively, we would be much better off in the long run. Story 25. 1. Writing an essay without artificial intelligence. 2. Understanding what artificial intelligence wrote is difficult because students no longer have a solid foundation in learning. Story 26. How to look things up and determine whether they are credible and reliable sources. Story 27. Navigating a store requires common sense, especially when a shopping cart is involved. It drives me crazy that people can go to the same grocery store for years and then, a few steps inside, stop and stare as if they have never been in a store before. People often leave their carts in the way while they examine products on the shelves. Some even turn their carts so they block the entire aisle. Is keep right except to pass really that hard to remember? Older shoppers sometimes stop to greet each other and start a conversation, creating two carts that block the aisle. Others step confidently from an aisle into the main path without looking. It is a T intersection. The person going across the top of the T has the right of way. Some shoppers take an item from a refrigerated or frozen section and then leave it on a shelf with non-perishable goods. For example, leaving raw poultry or frozen fish next to cookies. That contaminates the food I plan to buy. I am disabled, and I have better manners than that. People also leave their carts in the parking spot next to them, even when the adjacent spot is a blue-painted accessible parking space. I drive a wheelchair-accessible van. I am able to move that cart so I can park or deploy the ramp, but many holders of accessible parking permits cannot. Story 28. Sewing is not about making an entire outfit, but about basic stitch work to patch a hole, mend a tear, or reattach a button. Story 29. Admit they do not know something so they can genuinely learn it, not to be proud. Story 30. The ability to see nuance is rare. Reddit, for example, is filled with people who take black or white stances on everything, and if you dare to introduce nuance, you are downvoted to hell. This also happens in real life. Story 31. Fixing things. You don't always need something new, and you feel a great deal of accomplishment. Story 32. Handle minor inconveniences with composure. Many people become debilitated or excessively anxious when even small annoyances occur. Story 33. How to read a clock face with only the hands and hour marks. How to read it when the numbers are not present. Story 34. Spatial awareness. Everyone is just standing in each other's way. Story 35. I am a crew lead at a factory supervising about 40 employees per crew. About half of the workers cannot do basic math even with a calculator. I suspect several of them have limited reading skills. Workers range from 20 to 60 years old, so this is not about any specific generation. Yesterday, I had to help someone finish a job that produced 20 devices. They needed to record their materials. Each device uses 1, 2, or 3 of a particular component, but they could not grasp that the total would be 20, 40, or 60 components depending on how many were used per device. Story 36. Reading, whether comprehensive or basic. I'm finding that many people can barely read. When they do read something, they often do not comprehend it. I mean simple reading like signs and pamphlets. At my job, I sometimes have to be out where the customers are and ring up a purchase. When a customer just stares at me after I give them the total, I point to the card reader and say, "It's asking you something." I know it says tap, insert, or swipe your card, but some of them ask me what to do. Just the other day, a customer did not know what the card reader wanted after staring at it. So I said, "What does it say? I can't see it from here." They replied, "Not really anything." That is a strange response. They did not say the screen was blank or that it was not asking anything. They were not squinting or adjusting their position like other customers who need reading glasses. I think they could not read. I gave up and told them to tap their card. Story 37. How to correctly give change from a cash register to a customer. Story 38. The ability to think critically about one's beliefs when new information contradicts those beliefs. Story 39. Reading comprehension. I have an enormous amount of objective observations and empirical data to back it up. Laughing out loud. Story 40. Listening, not waiting for a chance to talk or prepare a comeback. Just hearing someone. It's wild how rare that is. Story 41. Be courteous. Say excuse me, please, and thank you. Be patient. Read. Story 42. Analytical writing. Thank God for that, because a few of us who have this skill can make a great career out of it. Story 43. Being able to see things from the point of view of others. Most people cannot extend the thought experiment to the rules of religions other than their own. Story 44. Spatial awareness. How are you so self-centered that you can barely notice what is around you? Story 45. The ability to recognize bullshit. All politicians are lying pieces of shit. Story 46. Develop the ability to troubleshoot a problem. Inventory the possible causes and assign a probability to each. Check them one by one until you find the root cause. Story 47. Few people have word processing skills beyond changing the font size and running spell check poorly. Changing the line spacing, hanging indents, or tab stops seems impossible. No one knows how to apply styles or create columns. Story 48. Look people in the eye when speaking to them and give them your undivided attention. Story 49. Knowing how to write properly, including spelling, grammar, syntax, and so on. Story 50. Emotional regulation and basic communication skills. I am regarded as giving great interpersonal advice to family and friends. 80% of the time I am saying things like, have you slowed down to consider the other person's perspective and why it might make them behave that way? Or it sounds like this was a miscommunication and you should have an upfront and honest conversation with them. Story 51. Common sense. Emotional stability. Concise language. Correct spelling. Courtesy. Basic math. Spatial awareness. Seeing the whole picture and making decisions based on patterns and thought instead of simply reacting emotionally. Etiquette. Thoughtfulness toward others. Story 52. Competence. Too often I see colleagues simply forwarding email requests until someone figures it out. Story 53. Most people really do not know how to use their computers or smartphones. Story 54. Emotional regulation is not really a secret. Story 55. Properly wash your hands and use turn signals. Not necessarily in that order. Story 56. Accountability. If you do something, you own it. Learn and grow from it. Strong people accept responsibility for their actions. Weak people blame everyone else. Story 57. Reading comprehension is literally cheating. You get the right answer by just reading the thing. Story 58. How to communicate your emotions and listen attentively when others communicate theirs. Story 59. Ability to follow directions and read a manual. Honestly, your life will improve so much if you read your appliance and home system manuals. If you paid for something nice, get everything you can out of it. Do not just use it like a basic device. Story 60. Sewing. Cooking from scratch. Truly listening without planning a response. Story 61. Media literacy. Maybe it's because I enjoyed Has Been Hotel and feel forced to defend it as my favorite show, or at least appear to because so many people are wrong. Or when I showed my own work, people could not understand why my future-based story did not have everyone in high-tech suits. When I mentioned that it was based on Dune, they looked at me and questioned why I would base my story on another work. People do not know how the media they engage with is made, do not understand the creative process, have never created anything themselves, and have never thought about the things they enjoy. Everyone borrows their beliefs from others. Story 62. My stepson refused to learn to read an analog clock as a child in the early 2000s. Story 63. Accountability. Own your mistakes and bad decisions and apologize. Story 64. Understanding nuance. People do not know or care what words mean anymore. Story 65. I can change my views when new evidence is presented. It is easier to fool a person than to convince them they have been fooled. And this is true for many people. Story 66. Civics. It is scary how many people do not know how our government works, yet they have the ability to cast a vote. Story 67. Admitting when you are wrong or when you do not know something. Story 68. Listening. Most people just wait until it is their turn to talk. Story 69. Empathy for situations they have never experienced. People, memory, and empathy are different. Story 70. Spatial awareness. I started grocery shopping late on weekdays to avoid the crowd and people blocking an entire lane. A month ago, I walked up to a middle-aged woman who had the lane blocked. I stood beside her while she examined an item for 25 seconds and she did not see me. So I politely asked if I could pass. It happens on every visit. Story 71. Driving feels like half the people on the road are accidents waiting to happen. Story 72. Emotional regulation is not a secret. The number of adults I have seen throw fits, stomping and clenching their fists when told no or when they do not get what they want immediately used to shock me. I have worked with the public for a long time, though. They do not try that behavior with me anymore. If they do, I have them escorted out of my store like a naughty child. I will not tolerate nonsense. Story 73. Realizing you are wrong during an argument and changing your mind. Story 74. Listen to someone without interpreting and try to understand what they are actually communicating. Instead, many people hear only a few words and state their opinion immediately. To be a good speaker, be a good listener first. Story 75. In no particular order. Penmanship, driving, and communication. Story 76. I am starting to become convinced that empathy is one of them. Story 77. I would not call it secretly since it is so readily apparent. Spatial awareness. Stop blocking the entire aisle with your cart while you debate which spaghetti sauce to buy for 5 minutes. Please move. This is one thing I miss from being on active duty. For a while, hardly anyone had this issue. Story 78. The ability to hold 2 or more emotions at once, especially those that seem to conflict. I am a therapist. People often tell me they have been taking care of their mother in her dying state for years, and now that she has died, they feel relief and worry that this means they are a bad person. Now, they feel relief because they no longer have to do the hard work of caring for her, and they also miss her and love her. I am convinced that if more people could hold multiple emotions at once instead of forcing them to be either or, the world would be a very different place. Story 79. Understanding nuance in communication, relationships, information, and almost everything. Story 80. Form a single file line and stand in the right place while waiting. Story 81. Basic observation of their surroundings and reading comprehension. It is called mastery of the obvious in my house lately. Story 82. Disability etiquette. Do people know how to treat people with disabilities respectfully? Story 83. I am convinced that human interaction is a skill at this point. I bartend, and some of the interactions I have had are insane. Story 84. Reading, driving, preparing a meal at home, bathing, and processing new information are all everyday activities. The term basic skill might be too vague. Story 85. Verbal self-control. It is very irritating when you are trying to tell a person or a group of people something important and at least one person talks over you about something completely different. As a supervisor, this has become a pet peeve. It has happened regularly at several jobs. This morning, I was trying to give an employee very specific instructions, and he kept talking about someone in another department who had bothered him. Why cannot employees just be quiet and listen? Story 86. How to properly clean the buttocks. I have heard many nurses and estheticians who perform waxing say how often they see stool on the buttocks. It blows my mind. Story 87. A lot of people do not understand how to put themselves in the shoes of other people. It seems as if their life and experiences are the only ones that exist. Story 88. I am neurodivergent and a therapist. For me, the most frustrating thing is when people cannot see patterns. Too often people must hit rock bottom before they change, when the pattern could have been prevented, for example in United States politics. People also tend to stick their heads in the sand and prioritize individualism, which is frustrating for a developed nation. As a social worker, I am irritated having to help the very people who voted against their own best interests and then wonder why we have no social support programs to help them. Story 89. Emotional intelligence, self-reflection, admitting when you are wrong, taking accountability, and accepting criticism without becoming defensive or spiraling. Story 90. I used to think it was admitting you are wrong. Now that I have seen the rest of the country, it is too hard to pick what basic skills most adults do not have. Story 91. Tying your shoelaces in the right direction prevents them from loosening on their own. Story 92. Most adults do not know how to manage money or understand how it works. They may know the theory from finance classes, but when it is time to apply it, that knowledge disappears. Story 93. It's good to read these answers because I honestly started to think maybe the problem was with me. I saw the things everyone wrote as problems and thought I might be too critical or autistic, because I could not understand how people could be so ignorant. Everything written here ran through my mind almost all day. But now I know the problem is not with me. Most people really are like one-bit creatures. Story 94. Do not stand in the middle of the path that others are trying to use. Story 95. Half of adults do not have an internal monologue. Half cannot read above a 5th grade level. About 1/3 cannot think in hypotheticals. Story 96. Know your rights as a worker and the applicable laws. Too many people are taken advantage of, and poor management has become normal. Story 97. Empathy means giving someone the benefit of the doubt until you have more information, rather than making a harsh judgment. Story 98. I swear my boyfriend lacks critical thinking and problem-solving skills. I also have a coworker in her 40s who clearly lacks certain social skills. Story 99. When dressing themselves, I cannot believe how adults leave their homes. Yes, you have the freedom to express yourself and choose your appearance as you wish, but I think some of these people do not own mirrors. Belly buttons and buttocks are visible everywhere I go. Story 100. Spatial awareness is essential when driving. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.